Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said that what happens this autumn will determine the future of this war, and right now Ukraine's victory plan hinges on American support. On Thursday, Zelensky met with President Joe Biden, and then, shortly after, with Vice President, Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris to present his plan. He's slated to meet former President, Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump on Friday. What are the elements of the victory plan? How well did Zelensky's visit to the U.S. go? I'm Jeremy Durak, a journalist at Kyiv Post, and here's some things you should know about Ukraine's plans and progress toward ending the war. In the Ukrainians' view, the only way Russian leader Vladimir Putin is going to agree to seriously consider peace talks is if he sees that he's losing the war. So how can Ukraine make Russia feel that it's losing? Simple, the Ukrainians say, by demilitarizing Russia. How can Ukraine do that? Well, in the past month, and particularly in the past few days, the Ukrainians have been demonstrating how. On Wednesday, September 18th, using only drones that they built themselves, Ukraine caused an earthquake-sized explosion in Russia as at least 20,000 tons of high explosives at one of Russia's most important munitions depots, Toropets, in Russia's Tver region, detonated. The site held tens of thousands of 122mm artillery rockets, S-300 and S-400 heavy anti-aircraft missiles, Tochka-U tactical missiles, Iskander missiles, and probably missiles sent from North Korea and/or Iran. The resulting fire was detected by NASA satellites. 2 days later, Kyiv hit two more munitions depots, Oktyabrskaya base, also in the Tver region, only about 16 kilometers away from Toropets, and the Tikhoretsk base in the Krasnodar region. The extent of the damage to those facilities isn't clear, but photos posted online purportedly show large explosions. Ukraine had previously managed to carry out numerous strikes on military targets, particularly airfields in Russia, but by any measure, last week was a tremendous Ukrainian success. You might also be aware of the Kursk incursion. On August 6th, Ukraine turned the tables on Russia when it became the first country to occupy Russian land since World War II. In a matter of weeks, the Ukrainians managed to capture more territory in Russia than Russia had been able to claw from Ukraine via heavy losses and months of meat grinder assaults. According to Zelensky, because of the Kursk incursion, about 40,000 Russian troops had been diverted from Ukraine back to Russia to try to expel the Ukrainian troops from Kursk. Meanwhile, it's reportedly getting more and more difficult for Moscow to recruit new soldiers. Reportedly, Moscow has even been using Russian sailors as infantrymen, for example, deploying the crew of the Admiral Kuznetsov aircraft carrier to the Kharkiv and Donetsk regions. All the while, the Russian military struggles to remove the Ukrainians from Kursk. This is in part because of Putin's reluctance to pull soldiers away from Ukraine's Donetsk region. Also, so far, for one reason or another, he seems more averse to carpet bombing the Kursk region in Russia than he has been, for example, in Mariupol and Kharkiv in Ukraine. It's also worth remembering that this week, 1 year ago, using Anglo-French Storm Shadow missiles, Ukraine destroyed Russia's Black Sea Fleet headquarters in occupied Crimea. It was a sort of nail in the coffin of Kyiv's long campaign of enfeebling the Black Sea Fleet using Ukrainian sea drones and allies' missiles. Zelensky's victory plan was likely aimed at seeking a U.S. buy-in to give him the tools to do a lot more of this kind of thing. Ukraine argues, see what we can achieve with just our drones. See what we can do with Storm Shadows. Give us the tools and the green light to use them, and we'll declaw the bear that's threatening all of Europe for you now. Let's suppose that Ukraine destroys enough Russian ammunition storage sites, airfields, personnel, and equipment, while meanwhile sanctions really hurt the Russian economy. Finally, Moscow comes to the negotiating table where Ukraine agrees to leave Kursk if Russia quits the Donbass, for example. The next stage would be an assurance that Moscow won't rebuild its forces to attack again. How can that be achieved? With Ukraine joining the NATO defensive alliance, which the head of Ukraine's presidential office, Andriy Yermak, said was part of the victory plan. Finally, Ukraine will want help rebuilding, along with further integration into the West, by, for example, joining the European Union. So how did Thursday's meeting go? Meeting in the Oval Office, after thanking Zelensky for presenting his victory plan, Biden said, "Russia will not prevail. Ukraine will prevail and will continue to stand by you every step of the way." For her part, Harris offered full-throated support for Ukraine while making a not-so-subtle jibe against her rival, Donald Trump. In candor, I share with you, Mr. President, there are some in my country who would instead force Ukraine to give up large parts of its sovereign territory, who would demand that Ukraine accept neutrality and would require Ukraine to forego security relationships with other nations, she said. These proposals are the same as those of Putin, and let us be clear, they are not proposals for peace. Instead, they are proposals for surrender, which is dangerous and unacceptable. Biden promised a surge in security assistance for Ukraine to help Ukraine win this war, and announced that Ukraine will receive $7.9 billion in military support, of which $5.5 billion would come directly from existing U.S. stockpiles, and $2.4 billion would be provided from orders to U.S. industry. The money will provide another Patriot air defense battery and additional missiles, a training program for 18 Ukrainian F-16 pilots, as well as long-range joint standoff weapons, glide bombs. Notably absent are more long-range ATACMs, something Ukraine has been seeking. Ukraine also wasn't publicly given permission to fire U.S. long-range missiles at targets in Russia, another key goal. One reason may be fear of Russian retaliation. Although the Russians have threatened nuclear retaliation on a near monthly basis since the February 2022 full-scale invasion of Ukraine, on Wednesday, Putin announced plans to broaden Russia's rules on the use of its nuclear weapons, allowing it to unleash a nuclear response in the event of a massive conventional air attack. The British are reportedly in favor of letting Ukraine use their bunker-busting Storm Shadow missiles to attack military targets in Russia, but the U.S. has so far held the veto because Storm Shadows rely on U.S. intel and tech. Storm Shadows would be a reasonable first step toward the U.S. eventually allowing Ukraine to use American long-range missiles, like ATACMs, to shoot at Russian military targets in Russia. But it remains to be seen whether the U.S. attitude will change. Meanwhile, Zelensky's trip to the U.S. was overshadowed by ex-President Trump, who claimed in a speech that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was because Zelensky and Biden had failed to negotiate with Putin. Those cities are gone, they're gone, and we continue to give billions of dollars to a man who refuses to make a deal, Zelensky, Trump said. While there are many Republicans who strongly support Ukraine, there is a possibility that U.S. support for Ukraine could dry up under a Trump presidency. While Trump ultimately declined to weigh in, his most vocal supporters in Congress held up aid for Ukraine for months over last winter, leading to losses in Ukraine on the battlefield due to a lack of ammunition. Trump himself has declined to say whether he would support Ukraine as president or to say if it's in America's interests for Ukraine to win the war. However, his running mate, J.D. Vance, who said he doesn't care about Ukraine, supports appeasing Russia by giving it the Ukrainian territory that it's now occupying. A Trump White House would also likely seek to reduce America's leadership role in NATO. It will be interesting to see what comes out of Friday's meeting between Trump and Zelensky. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you'd like more content like this.